Is there any belief that politicians are going to get involved in this?
For sure. I mean, to what extent, I don't know. But yes, it's an interesting dynamic of how much does the team get better by the end of the year? And then how does the administration factor in boosters saying, wait a minute, you told us that Belichick's here, this is going to get better quickly, and it's going to set us up for the future. When do we see that? And that's the question they hope they don't have to answer, but I think they're going to have to.
Hey everybody, welcome on into another edition of Tying Together with Tim Boehm. I am Tim Boehm here with producer John McHugh, and I was joking with you off camera, John, but this is a little UNC heavy today.
A little bit, but I'm sure a decent portion of our listeners are interested in such things.
Yeah, so this is back-to-back weeks. We're talking about college athletics, but it is just dominating everything right now, and I can't get enough of it. I'm a huge sports fan. We do talk politics a lot today in NIL, but just how Carolina has evolved with Lee Roberts, the chancellor there, and how much of a role he's played into it. John, you're a big Penn State guy.
I am.
Do these conversations happen a lot?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it happens everywhere. I will say the politics of it is a little less obviously involved up there. Penn State is a state school, but it's a state affiliated school. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's different. It's not as directly impacted by those kind of decisions. But yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. It's things are changing. Schools are adapting or failing to adapt. It's everywhere.
Yeah, we'll talk about it afterwards a little bit. But the balance between basketball and football at a place like Penn State, I think it's probably interesting too. So Greg Barnes is our guest today. He's with Inside Carolina as part of the On3 network. He's been with them for, I think, almost 20 years. And I listen to the podcast that they do over at Inside Carolina with him all the time. And he is just so smart and knows so much and knows all the people behind the scenes about what's going on with NIL, conference realignment, basketball, football, Bill Belichick, and that decision. One of my biggest questions about all this is how do you measure success? Because it's been a unique start for Carolina, and so it's just fascinating. So let's get right to it. Here's Greg Barnes. First of all, I am a huge fan of yours, so thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
One of the reasons I like it is you're just so good at describing what has become incredibly complicated. What's your background in wanting to take on? I mean, the business of sports is really kind of your specialty in a lot of ways.
It's become that. It really dates back to the NCAA investigation back in 2010. At that point in time, we were able to break that story in July of 2010. But I was very naive as to the inner workings of the NCAA. And so for the better part of 7 years, I was really kind of in deep trying to figure out exactly what the bylaws meant, why it was set up the way it was. And once you start doing that, you start peeling back the layers. You kind of see the wizard behind the curtain. And there are a lot of questions that can be raised when you do that. And so the fact that we're here now is not a surprise. 1984 is a very important date. It's an inflection point in a lot of this financial stuff. Go back even further to when Walter Byers, who was the longtime NCAA head, he talks about how they crafted the term student athlete to avoid employment laws. So this goes back decades upon decades, and now we're finally seeing a lot of the ramifications of that, and actually starting to benefit students.
Is the speed of it all? I mean, what's it like trying to keep pace with this? And has it gone faster or about what you thought it would be? Or
it's like you speed up and you slam on the brakes. You speed up and slam on the brakes because the House settlement was kind of thrown at us very quickly a year and a half ago. And so we're trying to wrap our heads around it. And then we get to last fall where we think it's going to become official. And Judge Claudia Wilkins says, nope, there's some things we need to work on. We're going to punt. And so we get to April and everybody was ready for April 7th to come because that's when it was going to take effect. Well, same thing happens. She has concerns about the scholarship situation. So now we're getting to that July 1 start date. It has not been approved yet. So everything's in place except for the judge's final ruling. And a couple weeks before July 1, she says, okay, it's approved. And now we're off running again.
Before we get into some of the details of some of the things that are going on, Do you think, everyone talks about the conference being so far behind the SEC and the Big Ten and all that, but is Carolina put itself in the best position that it can in the current climate for this moment?
I think so. The fact that North Carolina has always kind of been a leader in all areas of NCAA life. I mean, they've done a great job, obviously, with basketball. And football, while it gets kind of a knock because it hasn't been as elite as SEC or Big Ten schools or Clemson or Florida State, that's really the only program that hasn't excelled. And then when you start talking about geography, the SEC is not in North Carolina. The Big Ten is not in North Carolina. And that's very attractive to be able to expand those footprints if you're the Big Ten or the SEC wanting to expand. And then North Carolina has done a very good job with their booster foundation. I mean, the scholarship endowment that the Rams Club has generated, I don't know the exact number now, but it's upwards of like $550 million. And that sets them up with scholarships moving forward. So all these things in terms of what Carolina is puts them in a very good spot. And then you start talking about Lee Roberts coming in and some of the changes that he's implemented. Yes, North Carolina is in a very good position for where they are right now.
That's what I want to get to next, too, because to me, I don't think there was a lot of consternation when Lee Roberts got hired.
Sure.
Not an academic guy, in well with the Republicans in this state. To me, if he didn't come, what do you think the situation would look like? And how has he changed everything?
It's interesting because if you go back for a long time, it was just academic leaders at UNC. They would work their way up. And Kevin Guskowitz, who's now at Michigan State, he was similar, but he also, because he had so many ties to the athletic department with his work with concussion studies, he had a better understanding of what athletics was and how important it could be for the university. So that we were already starting to see a shift in how the chancellor was kind of viewing what the university was from an academic and an athletic standpoint. Kevin kind of pushed that along, and then when Lee comes in, it's almost, from my perspective, it's not academics versus athletics anymore. This is a business. Athletics is very beneficial, not just for the money it brings in, but for the marketing aspect of things. He's really big on the front porch of the university type deal that Dean Smith talked about. He's really looked at it from that perspective, and so he's really embracing athletics. So yes, there are still people who look at Lee Roberts for his ties to the GOP and for his not having that academic background, but at the same time saying, well, wait a minute, he kind of understands what we've been saying for a long time, that athletics needs to be embraced more within the university. And so it is a very interesting development that has occurred on the campus.
But there's not a lot of vocal criticism.
There's not.
10 years ago in academics and stuff, the faculty council or whatever it's called, they were very loud, and it feels like they've been very quiet in recent years, it seems like.
And he's been very firm. He went last January to a faculty council meeting and said, look, we're going to support football. We're going to push money into football. These are the reasons why. We think this is beneficial for everybody involved, including academics. He makes no bones about it. The university budget is well over $1 billion. Athletics is less than $200 million. So there's no confusion there. But the athletic side of things can really boost interest in the university. I mean, they had 87,000 applications for 4,500 spots this past year, and they really point to athletics as being a big part of that. So there's an understanding of, yes, you have that academic side of things, which is very important, but athletics can help that and supplement that. It doesn't have to be enemies of each other.
So the settlement and whatnot, universities can spend essentially, $20 million?
$20.5 million.
And Carolina's at 13 essentially for football. Mm-hmm. Basketball is in at 7. That's actually for everyone thinks Carolina's a basketball school, but that $7 million is better than a lot of other universities, right?
For sure.
And that'll make a difference.
Make a big difference. And so the back payment portion of the House settlement, which is the $2.8 billion, the way it's structured is that 75% goes to football players, 15% to basketball, and then 5 and 5 for baseball and women's basketball. Most schools moving forward are kind of using that ratio. North Carolina is not. North Carolina is at a 65-35 split, which speaks to your point of basketball, while it's not getting what football is, it's still doing a lot better in terms of the rev share portion than many of its peers.
Has Jim Tanner is the GM for basketball. There's been a lot of consternation about Hubert Davis, the head basketball coach. What's going to happen? Are they seeing a big difference with him and how the evolution of the basketball program has come along? Because I think people saw Carolina basketball kind of stagnant as far as where it was headed as a business, right? Is that fair?
For sure. Absolutely.
Has it changed with Jim Tanner in there, do you think?
It's probably too early to say for sure, but I think the fact that Hubert finally got to the point of saying, okay, we need a GM. Like, this is different than what it used to be. I need help. And he really made that decision this past year. And so with Jim coming in, I think the whole idea of kind of outsourcing some of the scouting, a lot of the contract negotiations with NIL is very beneficial. So I think from that standpoint, that's a positive that the athletic department and the basketball program is moving in the right direction. How much Jim has to play with that development remains to be seen, but we've heard nothing but good things about him, and they brought in a lot of quality pieces for this upcoming year, so we'll see how that plays out.
So the $7 million from the university, everyone's talking about a $14 million roster. So where's that other $7 million? What is that?
So there's two components here. You have the rev share, which is a $20.5 million, right? And the school can pay that. That's on the budget item list. That's just an expense. You still have commercial NIL. And where things had kind of gone awry with NIL initially is you had these collectives, which are basically groups of boosters who are funneling money in and paying players. And there's really no oversight. Very problematic. But with the House settlement, one of the big components was creating commercial NIL that could be checked. And Deloitte is actually kind of running it. But any NIL deal that is over $600 has to be submitted to NIL Go, which is a platform that Deloitte uses. And what that does is they can take a look at it and say, okay, is this actual a business transaction? Is this like the local car dealership hiring a player for $10,000 to represent them on their car lot? That's what it's intended to be. And so that additional $7 million of that $14 million that we've reported, that's where a lot of that comes from, is the ability to set up these business dealings within the NIL framework that are legal, that are within NCAA bylaws. And so that supplements the rev share.
And UNC plays a role in that?
Yes, UNC can. Initially, they could not. They could have nothing to do with that. But as the rules have changed, they can now help facilitate some of those deals. And it's a lot more hands-on than it used to be.
So is this still the Wild West, just a little tamer? Or no?
Yes. When NIL first came in July of 2021, there was only 3 rules in place. Only 3. Each year they've added more as they've seen kind of the things that transpired. Initially, as a football staffer told me, it was free agency without contracts. And we've seen that play out. The Florida quarterback a number of years ago, he agreed to a deal and just never got paid. And a lot of that thing was happening. We're past that. Now, the question is, are we where we're going to be 2 years from now? And the answer to that is no. We don't know exactly where it's going, but it's already changed somewhat already. There's lawsuits already in place. There's lawsuits that were waiting in the wings for the House settlement to come through. Those are ongoing. There's already been changes in place. There's going to be more changes in place with key parts of the House settlement, which we can talk about. So we're in a better spot, and it's a lot better than it was. But to say where we're going to be, I think would be incorrect.
Is collective bargaining, union, whatever, is that inevitable?
I think it's inevitable.
How does that work in a state like North Carolina, where right to work and public employees can't collectively bargain?
Right. It's a great question, and that's what they're trying to figure out a way. Bubba Cunningham thinks it can work. There's a lot of hoops they have to jump through to get to that point. I'm not sure how it can work without declaring players employees. They're adamant at this point in time that they're not going to do that, but I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, do they become employees of the collective? But then is that just a shell game? I mean,
is.
it's just fascinating.
Right.
Go ahead. What are you going to say?
I was going to say, when Northwestern a couple of years ago, those players for the football team tried to unionize, and that was a big storyline. And then when you talk about some of the employment labor unions in California, they thought they were going to be able to get players named as employees last year. Well, that fell through. So there have been attempts to kind of get us there. It just hasn't happened yet.
Is there any belief around Carolina that Congress is going to do something? I mean, there's all this talk. There's a bill out there, at least one. Is there any belief that politicians are going to get involved in this?
For sure. I mean, to what extent, I don't know. But yes. And if you go back to the Jeremy Bloom, the U.S. skier, he had a big NCAA lawsuit about NIL 20-some years ago now. And in that House hearing, one of the points made was the only time the NCAA has made dramatic changes is when either a court made them change or Congress. And so I think that's the idea of the courts can really help direct this, but if Congress will come in and actually do something about it and make a big change, that may be most beneficial. And that may help the NCAA more than any of these other avenues.
All right, let's talk about football, obviously. It's been an interesting start for Carolina and Bill Belichick. I'm most interested in, because if you follow sports, you know that the talent is not there to where Bill Belichick wants to win. I mean, I don't think you could have been. Maybe you wanted a closer game, but I don't know if anybody was surprised if you really knew that they lost to TCU as much as they wanted to win. So then I started thinking, how are they going to measure what a successful year is and what it means for next year for Carolina? Do you think they've thought about that or know what that means?
I think the administration does. And in talking with John Pryor recently, who was the former chair of the Board of Trustees, he even made the point that it's unrealistic to expect a guy to come in without a lot of talent on hand and win immediately. It's a process. And if you look at the recruiting work that they've done for the 2026 class, it has gotten better. But I think there's also the component of that's what the administration thinks. What about the fan base? What about everybody else who's watching? And if you're going to pay a head coach $10 million, which is twice what Mac Brown made, and you're going to pay his staff more than a staff has ever been paid in Chapel Hill, and you're going to commit all this money to rev share and bring on all this money to elevate the game day experience, you need to see an ROI fairly quickly. And so you certainly can't have a losing record this year, because then a lot of people are going to be very upset. But as you saw after the game on Monday night, nobody expected that. And so a lot of fans are like, well, what are we paying for? Like, what is this? And so it's an interesting dynamic of how much does the team get better by the end of the year? And then how does the administration factor in boosters saying, wait a minute, you told us that Belichick's here. This is going to get better quickly, and it's going to set us up for the future. When do we see that? And that's a question they hope they don't have to answer, but I think they're going to have to.
I was there for that first game. The atmosphere in the parking lot and before the game was the best I've ever seen.
Sure, I agree.
But the contrast of that versus the stadium in the fourth quarter was wild.
Yeah.
And it tells you that the fans expect it, but I just don't know what's going to come this year. But another question is, do people really still believe he's going to stick around for 3-4 years? And that's a big question, right?
It is. And I think it's a valid question. And kind of what I've thought all along is, if this really goes off the trail, off the tracks, it would not surprise me to see Bill say, you know what, I tried it. I'm ready to get back into the NFL and leave after a year. There's not much of a buyout there. There's no reason for him not to. But if there's a little bit of success, I think the fact that he's got a couple of kids on the staff, we understand that he tried to work Steve Belichick and his son in as a head coach in waiting during negotiations last December, which fell through. But that leads me to believe that he does have a foundation here and that he has a reason to stay. And as long as it's showing progress, I think he'll hang around for a few years to see if he can get it done.
To me, what was most important about the whole process of him coming in, and we can talk about whether this is true or not, but the professionalization of it was like a foundation for the new era of college football. Is that true, you think? So even if he left after this year, that the football program with the new era of college athletics is going to be in a much better position regardless of what happens with him?
I think so, and I think that's the key part of the Belichick hire. Everybody was excited about Belichick, but I mean, he's 6 months younger than Mac Brown. He only has so many years left, regardless of how successful he is. And so I really thought the fact that there was so much internal strife during that hiring process. There was some who wanted to spend a lot of money and get a name like Belichick and really force the university to say, we're going to embrace football finally. And then you had the more cautious side is like, well, we understand the money that we have available. This is kind of what we've done. We think we can have success. We picked the right guy. And there was a lot of struggle there. And so I think the fact that North Carolina was willing to take that big step with the help of Lee Roberts, who gets a lot of credit for getting that hire done, I think it speaks very well for where North Carolina is moving forward. Even if Belichick leaves, say, in 3 years, they think a lot of those key pieces are going to be in place so they can bring in somebody. And if you're offering $10 million to the next guy, you may not get the top guys, but you're going to get a lot of top 25 caliber coaches.
Lombardi gets a lot of, Mike Lombardi's the GM for football. He gets a lot of talk too. I think he's doing the radio shows now instead of Belichick. I've heard some people though say that just recruiting and all that, running a program, is not like the NFL, and it may not work. I mean, is that possible?
Sure, of course. The idea that the way the college game has changed to where it is about player value, it is about evaluation unlike ever before. It makes sense that maybe somebody who's done it for a long time in the NFL can come in and make it work. Nobody's done it yet. So this is really a trial run. In theory, it can work. But at the same time, Bill Belichick's not having to go in and talk with mom and dad on the couch for a kid who lives down east and doesn't know. He has never had a true weight room at his high school, has never played in a big stadium. This is completely different than trying to sign a guy who's already made $25 million and is trying to find somewhere he can go win a Super Bowl. So there's a lot of different dynamics involved there, but at least at a foundational level, in theory, it makes sense. But it certainly could go awry.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see all this money. I mean, I'm a big college basketball guy, and I'm really curious. Like Will Wade, for instance, they're ponying up some money to do him. I think that's gonna be fascinating to watch this year too, because I think the Triangle, some of its best years in basketball were 04, 05 when Wake, Carolina State, and Duke were great. It's fun to beat up, if you can. But I think you're a Carolina grad yourself. Like it's more fun when everybody's competitive, right?
Absolutely. And the glory days that everybody talks about, of course, is back in the 70s and early 80s, and I guess even to the late 80s if you're Duke and UNC. And I think that's where everybody wants to get to, is to be able to acknowledge the history of basketball, celebrate it, make sure you have good teams moving forward, while at the same time understanding that football is king now. And so you've got to really use your resources to embrace football. I think Carolina is doing that now. I think State's never going to fall too far behind Carolina in terms of what they're trying to do financially. So I think State's going to be in a good position moving forward. Duke obviously has done very well the last couple of years. So I think they're understanding the importance of football, while at the same time, with so many of the older boosters really just knowing ACC basketball and Tobacco Road, that's going to continue. And I agree. I think Will Wade's a good hire, and I think State will be much better very quickly.
If he sticks around. He jumps around quite a bit.
Yeah.
Although winning will help with that. If he doesn't, nothing happens. The finance stuff is really interesting to me too, because for those that follow, the Dean Dome and the future of the basketball arena is a big deal and a big discussion point moving forward. Does all this money go into that? Does it complicate factors like thinking about the future of a basketball arena?
I think there's so much more involved with just the athletic side of things. Lee Roberts, his background's really in finance, but commercial real estate as well. And I think when he's taking a broad look at the university, that hospital has grown and grown and grown. Mm-hmm. And you're quickly losing real estate on campus. And if you just look at it from that perspective, the easiest place for more hospital expansion to go is right there where the Smith Center is. And so that plays a role into it. And the other aspect that Lee was telling me about when I sat down with him last month is he talked about all these other new facilities. It's not just a basketball arena. There's entertainment. There's reason for people to come before the game and to hang out afterwards. And there's not that at the Smith Center where it currently is. And so there is this great debate of you have the nostalgia of the Smith Center for what it is and for the memories there. But you also have to say, we have to look at it from not only a men's basketball program perspective, but as an overarching university perspective, while at the same time saying, we've owned Carolina North for about a decade now, and we haven't done anything with it. And there's a lot of land up there. Now they're bringing in an additional 500 students each year for the next decade. You're going to have dorms probably at Carolina North. And so there's a lot of reasons for a move to make sense. And I think currently they're trying to weigh their options.
It feels it's slowly, inevitably moving to Carolina North.
It does feel that way.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, but, for purists, you get it. But at the same token, if there's bigger parking lots for tailgating, I mean, I could see a big, white building with the light blue Jordan logo on it you can see from 3 miles away, and then there's a Carolina sports bar, maybe a Jordan exclusive store there and a hotel. I mean, that just all kind of makes sense if you can get past the nostalgia.
And it's the revenue aspect of things.
Which is dominating everything.
It is. Rick Bearcat was hired as the chief revenue officer back in the spring. His key job is revenue generation. Steve Newmark comes in for NASCAR. 80% of their revenue is through sponsorships. There's a reason Steve Newmark is going to be the next AD. It's about revenue generation. And when you start looking at all the things you can do with the new arena in that area, premium seating is critically important. A lot of people get upset at the Blue Zone because it's empty, because everybody's inside. But what they will tell you behind the scenes is that has been a financial boon for the university because premium seating is where the money is. And the Dean Dome does not have any. And so once you start talking about having to do minimum renovations at the Smith Center currently, the expenses add up dramatically. And that brings in the conversation of moving it potentially up to Carolina North.
And maybe getting students closer to the floor, people up in boxes. That,
right. And as Lee Roberts told me, if you measure from Franklin Street to Carolina North versus Franklin Street to Dean Smith Center, same distance.
I'm sure they measured that very closely. All right, realignment. Are we stable here for a few years?
I think so. I think the heavy lifting was done with the ACC settlement with Clemson and FSU back in the spring. And that's very important because everybody was worried, if we're going to be stuck in the ACC through 2036, it's going to be a problem. But now you're talking about you can get out right now if you wanted to. But 2030 is where the exit fee drops to $75 million, which is where it would stay from that point in time through 2036. So I think just having a light at the end of the tunnel allows for everybody to kind of take a step back and say, okay, now we have to get our ducks in a row. We have to make sure we're where we need to be financially and as a football and men's basketball program to get ready for a potential jump. And then you have to say, where do we want to go? What does that look like? So I think for now, everything's pretty solid. I do think in a period of years, though, I do expect North Carolina likely to jump ship and go to one of those two conferences.
There's no question that's being investigated behind the scenes.
Of course, right.
By the university.
Yeah. And it has been for a while now.
But is it possible something else, major changes in college athletics too, like a football becomes its own professional type, with 40 teams or something, and that changes everything again?
Yes, for sure. We have no idea what it's going to look like 5 years from now. And I think Bubba Cunningham, from his vantage point, that's one thing that he's kind of harped on is we don't know what's going to happen in the years to come. And so there's a lot of panic and rush about what's going to happen in 2036, or at least before the settlement. It's a long way away. And so he always has kind of urged caution and to play it out. Yes, it would not surprise me whatsoever if the SEC and the Big Ten pick who they want to pick, get to 20 teams, 25 teams, whatever that may be, and then just completely redo the framework of what college athletics is. That would not surprise me in the least.
Do you think there's any sort of veering one way or the other towards the SEC or the Big Ten at this point? Because I know the academics would probably prefer the Big Ten.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah, because they're all AAU schools.
Yeah.
SEC is more of a cultural fit, and it really depends on who you talk to. If you talk to anybody associated with the faculty, they're going to push, as you said, towards the Big Ten. Whereas if you talk to big boosters, I think the majority opinion is probably the SEC. And
do you think that Carolina and Florida State and Clemson all kind of go at once, or domino effect?
I don't think so.
You don't?
I think for reasons that we talked about earlier about geography with North Carolina, Virginia's in a similar boat when you talk about there's no SEC schools up there. So everything that we've kind of heard is that the more desirable teams are probably Virginia and North Carolina above Clemson and Florida State. And
that will surprise a lot of people.
It
right?
will. But if you think about Florida State, for example, you're Tallahassee, you're not far from Athens, you're not far from Columbia, you're not far from Gainesville. So while you gain a big name, you're really not gaining anything ratings-wise, which is where all this comes back to. Whereas North Carolina, if you get UNC, then all of a sudden you've gained a lot of viewership in one of the largest and fastest growing states in the country. And so those things really factor in. It's not just the name program, which is what a lot of people think. But I mean, think about Maryland and the Big Ten. Even 11, 12 years ago when that happened, it was really about the Big Ten being able to get into the DMV, get on the Atlantic coast, more so than the program that Maryland was. And as we've seen, Maryland's probably worse now than they were in the ACC in terms of athletic accomplishments.
But I wonder financially if they're better. That's what's interesting to me.
Revenue's increased. I don't know that they're much better financially than they were. Which, yeah, very interesting. That
it's wild to think back to that now, right? Because it was crazy when they left. And I mean, again, 04, 05, that was, them and Duke was fascinating. So let's play this out and say Carolina does leave for the SEC or Big Ten. What do you think happens? First of all, there could be a fight with the legislature and all that over state and Carolina splitting up. But what do you think it means for basketball? And do you think they find a non-conference way to play each other still, or does that fall apart? Because that's one of the greatest traditions of the state, alongside with barbecue.
It really is. And I think what happens is, as we mentioned earlier, Lee Roberts having the ties that he has, that is very beneficial because there can actually be some communication there to figure out what's best. And I understand there's a lot of concern in UNC circles about, your legislature just would not allow Carolina to leave without NC State. But the legislature is going to do what's best financially for the university system. And if it's a massive divide in Carolina going versus not going, they would have a hard time explaining that to the constituents. And so I think really it's a matter of how do you benefit UNC while at the same time not hamstringing every other university in the university system. So there's a lot of work to be done on that side of things. There's also the possibility maybe NC State goes along. If you go back to the Virginia Tech situation years ago, there was a big push to get Virginia Tech into the ACC by legislature in Virginia. And so there'll be a lot of those dialogues that happen. In terms of basketball, though, if you look at Louisville and Kentucky, they make sure that they play basketball games every year. And so I think you will see those types of things. I would love to see going back to a Tournament of Champions type deal like we used to have. I loved that as a child. I don't know that we're going to do that, but with the ACC cutting back on the conference schedule, there is an opportunity to move some of those non-conference games, which those would be, to later in the year, so you can maybe still have a Carolina-Duke game to round out the regular season.
Yeah, Duke's going to be put in a really interesting position, right? Because do they stay with the ACC, or they're so basketball focused? Do they go to a Big East or something? I don't know. It's fascinating.
Right, and they've pumped so much money into football now to where they're competitive. Do you pull back on that and just say, we're just going to focus on basketball? Of course, UConn's in the Big East, and they've started pumping money into their football program. So they wanted
to come to the ACC, right?
That's right. And they've been trying to get into the Big 12. So there is that, we talk about the SEC and the Big 10 maybe expanding. Maybe there's room for some of these other programs that were maybe just basketball only or weren't as focused on football to maybe form their own conference and try to get things bigger. Because Wake Forest is never going to be able to go to the SEC. They don't have a large enough alumni base. They don't have a big enough stadium, those types of things, but there's still a passion there. And I think as long as there's a passion and there's some money involved from the boosters, a lot of things are on the table.
Do you think that the state could somehow work to try to get state and Carolina to go together? Because state's always been pretty solid with football, stable.
Correct.
For the most part.
For sure. And I think that would be one of those things of there'd have to be a lot of negotiations that take place. It's certainly a possibility. But I do think when you look back to the Bill Belichick hire, the fascinating thing about that hire is that Marco Rubio was involved, Tom Tillis was involved, Phil Berger was involved. That's your highest level of not only the U.S. government, but also at the state level. And so if that can happen for a head coaching hire, I don't think there'd be any question everybody would want to get involved and do what's best for UNC and NC State and all the other schools.
All right, one last question for you. There's a lot of consternation that this is all ruining college sports. I don't know. It's been pretty fun the last, watching these games and whatnot, and the ratings are higher than ever. Is that just not true?
I think it's change is hard. And what we once knew is no longer the case. And I think one of the hardest things for people to accept is that years ago, you could see a young freshman come onto the basketball court and look out of place, have deer in the headlights going on. And you could watch that player develop over the course of 3 or 4 years. And by the time that individual was a senior, they were a captain and they were leading a team to NCAA tournament victory of some sort. Those days are gone. And I think we've lost a lot from that standpoint. From the financial side of things, I think it's better than it's ever been. And I think once people kind of adjust, it'll be fine. It's just different. And that's a lot of the old timers have a hard time with that, which I understand. I get it. But my son, who's in college, him and his buddies follow sports differently than how I used to. And it doesn't bother him whatsoever. He looks at it like fantasy football and how you have different players coming in from all over, and can the pieces fit? And so it's generational. But I think thus far, with house settlement and some of the other ones that are coming, I think it's set up for success moving forward.
The acquisition part is hard. Like, I feel like and I don't, last year we went to the football game and they had the scrimmage after, and it was nice because you got to figure out who these guys are,
sure,
what they look like in some instances. But that part is hard. But it is, you're right, it's like fantasy football. It's kind of interesting to watch. The most important part of the basketball season sometimes now is like May, right?
Sure, it is, really is. And that was the interesting thing a couple years ago when Carolina was really good. Everybody by the end of February had fallen in love with Cormac Ryan and Harrison Ingram. And then a month later, they're gone.
Yeah.
And so you have a very short honeymoon period with these players. And that is difficult. I think we have lost something with that.
Yeah. Greg, thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in North Carolina politics and hear more conversations with people shaping our state and beyond, check out the Tying It Together YouTube channel in the description. Hit subscribe and let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.